Earth had fallen. Or at least, that's what the Zaxathari collective believed as their massive fleet of crystalline ships cast shimmering shadows over Earth's major cities. The vessels hung in the air like oversized Christmas ornaments that had gotten delusions of grandeur and decided to take over the planet. Supreme Commander Vexathor stood on the bridge of his flagship, the inevitable Victory, because apparently the Zaxathari weren't big on subtle naming conventions. His iridescent scales rippled with pride as he gazed down at the conquered planet through the ship's panoramic view screen. The expression on his face could only be described as that of a cat who had just caught a mouse. And like most cats in that situation, he was about to discover he'd greatly overestimated his success. "Behold," he declared, his voice carrying that special tone of smugness that seems to be universal among those who think they've won something. "The primitive humans didn't even attempt to resist our superior might." He spread his forearms wide, each limb gesturing dramatically at different segments of his bridge crew. "Their pathetic nuclear weapons remained in their silos, their armies stayed in their barracks, and their leaders surrendered without firing a single shot." His subordinates nodded enthusiastically, the kind of nodding that suggested their necks were spring-loaded and their paychecks depended on their enthusiasm. Commander Zixis, his second-in-command, was particularly vigorous in her agreement. Her head crest bobbed so frantically it looked like it might achieve liftoff. "Most wise, Supreme Commander," Zixis simpered, her scales shifting to match the exact shade of Vexathor's command sash, a bit of evolutionary mimicry that had somehow survived their species' advancement into space. "They recognized the futility of resistance against our technological superiority." In the corner of the bridge, seated in a chair that seemed deliberately designed to be uncomfortable for human anatomy, Maria Chen, Earth's designated diplomatic representative, pressed her lips together. A small snort escaped despite her best efforts. Vexathor's head swiveled toward her with the speed of someone who just heard someone whisper their name in an empty room. "Does something amuse you, human?" He practically spat the word human as if it left a bad taste in his mouth, which, given Zaxathari biology, it probably would have. Maria straightened in her chair, managing to look simultaneously professional and like someone watching a particularly good comedy show. "Oh no, please continue, Supreme Commander. I'm just—" She paused, choosing her words with exquisite care, taking in the historic moment. This seemed to please Vexathor, who immediately launched back into his monologue. Behind him, his bridge crew had already pulled out their data tablets and begun the time-honored tradition of corporate conquest: resource allocation meetings. "I claim the Pacific Ocean for mineral extraction," declared one officer, his scales flickering with acquisitive glee. "The Amazon rainforest biodiversity will make an excellent addition to my research division," added another, already drafting preliminary budgets. "I suppose someone should take responsibility for the Antarctic research stations," sighed a third, trying to sound put upon while practically vibrating with excitement. Maria watched this impromptu game of interstellar Monopoly with the air of someone who knew something absolutely hilarious, but wasn't quite ready to share the joke. She pulled out her own tablet, a decidedly Earth-made device that the Zaxathari had dismissed as harmless, and began typing what appeared to be meeting notes. In reality, she was documenting every single violation of Galactic Council protocols that the Zaxathari were committing. Her message thread with the Council's administrative division was getting longer by the minute. The fact that she'd labeled the conversation "Reasons Why Reading the Fine Print Matters," a case study, probably said everything about her current state of mind. Above her, Vexathor was still talking, his voice rising with each self-congratulatory sentence. "This will be remembered as the day the Zaxathari Collective proved its supremacy, when we demonstrated that our civilization stands above all others. When we—" Maria glanced at her tablet's clock and started a mental countdown. The Supreme Commander's victory speech was about to be interrupted by something he'd completely forgotten to consider, and she couldn't wait to see his face when it happened. 6 months earlier, the Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council resembled nothing so much as a cosmic amphitheater designed by a committee of bureaucrats who'd been told to make it impressive but also cost-effective. The result was a space that somehow managed to be both grandiose and mundane at the same time, much like the meeting currently taking place within it. Supreme Commander Vexathor stood at the presentation podium, manipulating his holo display with the confidence of someone who hadn't actually rehearsed their presentation, but assumed their natural brilliance would carry them through. Behind him, a series of increasingly complex battle plans floated in the air, complete with animated arrows, color-coded invasion zones, and at least 3 different transition effects that would have made a PowerPoint developer weep with joy. As you can see, Vexathor declared, gesturing at a particularly busy slide titled Operation Certain Victory, the Zaxthari remained committed to their naming conventions. Our analysis shows that Earth's defensive capabilities are, he paused for dramatic effect, negligible. In the audience, Maria Chen sat between a methane-breathing Jovian ambassador who kept accidentally burping small flames, and a silicon-based life form who appeared to be taking notes by crystallizing them directly into their body. She maintained an expression of polite interest while furiously documenting every word in her tablet's "Things That Will Be Hilarious Later" folder. The council's chief administrator, a being who appeared to be made entirely of flowing light and bureaucratic dedication, raised what might have been a hand. Supreme Commander, we must review the standard rules of engagement before proceeding. As per Section 1, Subsection A of the Galactic Code of Warfare, Vexathor's scales flickered in what the gathered species recognized as the universal sign for, yes, yes, get on with it. He settled into a pose that suggested he was paying attention while actually contemplating which Earth landmarks would look better with his face carved into them. The administrator's voice took on the special drone that bureaucrats across the galaxy had perfected for reading regulations. Rule 1. Any species initiating conquest must declare formal intent of warfare against all sentient species inhabiting the targeted planet. Maria's tablet pinged quietly as she added another note. They haven't even started mapping Earth's sentient species. This is going to be amazing. Rule 2, the administrator continued, all conquered species must be provided with adequate representation in the conquering species' governmental system. In his seat, Vexathor's aide was playing what appeared to be space Tetris on his datapad. Another aide had achieved what looked like a new personal best in their meditation app. Rule 3. The conquering species must maintain all existing ecosystems and cannot harvest more than 23.7% of any natural resource within the first solar cycle. Maria raised her hand, her face a masterpiece of innocent inquiry. Excuse me, but regarding Rule 1, how exactly does the Council define sentience? The administrator brightened. Literally, their luminescence increased by several candela. An excellent question. According to galactic standard measures, sentience is determined by a species' ability to demonstrate self-awareness, problem-solving capabilities, tool use, and/or complex social structures. The current testing protocol involves a series of standardized assessments, including but not limited to. Vexathor's scales had taken on the slightly glazed pattern that suggested he was mentally elsewhere. His second aide had progressed from meditation to what appeared to be a light nap. And of course, the administrator was still going, any species capable of passing the mirror test automatically qualifies for protection under Article 7 of the Sentient Rights Charter. Maria's hands shot up again. Just to clarify, this applies to all species meeting these criteria on a planet, correct? Not just the dominant species? Absolutely, the administrator's glow pulsed with approval. In fact, there was a fascinating case study from the Rigel system where a group of aquatic invertebrates successfully contested their planet's conquest on exactly these grounds. The documentation runs to only 17,000 pages. I'd be happy to share. The Zaxthari delegation's collective attention had now drifted so far that they were practically in another dimension. One of them had actually begun snoring, producing a sound remarkably similar to a kazoo being played underwater. Maria, meanwhile, was adding to her notes. Dolphins, great apes, corvids, maybe, cats, definitely, good luck with that. Which brings us to Rule 4. The administrator soldiered on, either oblivious to or choosing to ignore the varying levels of consciousness in their audience. Regarding the proper filing of Form GC 789B, Declaration of Hostile Intent. As the meeting dragged into its 4th hour, Maria found herself wondering if she should feel bad about what was going to happen to the Zaxthari. Then she remembered Vexithor's earlier comment about humans being barely more evolved than their primitive primate cousins, and decided that sometimes the best lessons came from experiencing the consequences of one's own arrogance. Besides, she thought, watching another Zaxathariade lose their battle with consciousness, someone should really tell them about octopuses. Eventually, maybe after they tried negotiating with the cats. Present day, Supreme Commander. Vexithor was having what he considered to be the best day of his illustrious career. He'd practiced this moment in front of his mirror for weeks. The dramatic unfurling of the surrender document, the victorious stance, even the exact frequency his scales should shimmer to catch the light just right. The fact that his personal videographer was capturing it all from 3 different angles made it even better. And now, he proclaimed, holding the document aloft like a trophy, I shall read the terms of humanity's complete and unconditional surrender. He paused, waiting for his aide to activate the dramatic background music they'd specially commissioned for this moment. The document unfurled with a satisfying swoosh. They'd actually gone through several rehearsals to get that sound just right. To the Supreme Commander of the Zaxthari Collective, he read, practically purring with satisfaction. We, the representatives of Earth's governments, hereby... Excuse me. The interruption was so unexpected that the background music stumbled, hitting a discordant note before falling silent. Vexithor's scales rippled with annoyance as he turned to face Maria Chen, who had finally risen from her uncomfortable corner chair. This is a historical moment, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. Interruptions are not appropriate. Maria nodded apologetically, though the effect was somewhat ruined by the fact that she was now openly grinning. Oh, I completely agree about the historical nature of this moment. I just have one tiny question. Did anyone on your legal team actually read Rule 1 of the Galactic Code of Warfare? The bridge fell silent. Even the background music composer stopped fiddling with their instruments. Commander Zixis stepped forward, her scales shifting to a defensive pattern. Of course we read the rules. We are the Zaxthari Collective. We have conquered 17 systems. 16 and a half, Maria corrected helpfully. The Proxima Centauri incident is still under review by the Council's Appeals Committee. She pulled out her tablet, which she'd somehow configured to make the classic ahem sound. But back to Rule 1, the one about declaring war on all sentient species of a planet before claiming victory? Vexithor's scales began to lose their triumphant sheen. We declared war on humanity. You are the dominant species of this world. Dominant? That's adorable. Maria tapped her tablet, projecting a hologram into the center of the bridge. Let me introduce you to some of my planet's other residents who might have something to say about that. The first image appeared, a dolphin performing complex mathematical equations by manipulating water rings. Meet Dr. Clixon Third Octave, leading researcher in fluid dynamics at the Atlantic Institute of Science. He's quite interested in discussing your illegal occupation of his ocean. Vexithor's videographer, showing remarkable professional dedication, zoomed in on the Supreme Commander's rapidly paling scales. And here, Maria continued, swiping to the next image, we have Professor Ook of the Great Ape Council. She's particularly interested in discussing your earlier comment about primitive primates. The image showed a gorilla using sign language to explain quantum mechanics to a group of students. But my personal favorite, Maria's grin had reached levels that would make the Cheshire Cat proud, is this one. The final image showed a cat sitting regally on what appeared to be a destroyed Zaxthari scout ship. The cat was batting around what was unmistakably a ceremonial rank insignia. That's Mr. Whiskers. He's the designated representative of Earth's feline population. He wanted me to inform you that all your shiny equipment now belongs to him by right of if I fits, I sits, a law that surprisingly has actual standing in galactic court thanks to the Felinoid Species Protection Act of 3427. The surrender document slipped from Vexithor's suddenly limp fingers. Behind him, Commander Zixis was already frantically sending messages to their legal department. So, Maria concluded cheerfully, shall we discuss the terms of your withdrawal, or would you like to try declaring war on several million additional species first? I should warn you, though, the octopuses are scheduled to demonstrate tool use next week, and they've been very interested in your ship's propulsion systems. The bridge of the inevitable victory erupted into chaos faster than a cat spotting an unattended tuna sandwich. Vexathor's perfectly choreographed moment of triumph had transformed into something more closely resembling an intergalactic version of Bring Your Panic to Work Day. "Get me the legal department!" Vexathor shrieked, his scales cycling through colors so rapidly he looked like a disco ball having an existential crisis. "Get me the cultural assessment division. Get me anyone who can explain how we missed multiple sentient species." Commander Zixis was already knee-deep in emergency communications, her datapad practically smoking from the frantic messages she was sending. "Supreme Commander, legal says they—" "Oh no. What do you mean, oh no?" Vexathor's voice had reached a pitch previously achievable only by excited dolphins. "They say they might have skimmed some of the preliminary assessment reports." Zixis swallowed hard. Apparently, they assumed that since humans were the ones with all the obvious technology, they were the only ones we needed to worry about. Maria, who had settled back into her uncomfortable chair with the air of someone enjoying their favorite comedy show, helpfully chimed in. "Oh, you might want to update that assessment. The Dolphins just launched their first underwater quantum computing center last month. They've been keeping it quiet because they're still arguing about whether to call it Flipper's Deep Thought or the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Ocean." On the main view screen, emergency alerts were popping up from Zaxathari ships worldwide. One captain reported that his ship's external sensors had been completely covered in what appeared to be octopus ink graffiti. Another was dealing with a group of ravens who had somehow figured out how to operate the ship's external maintenance drones and were now using them to build what looked suspiciously like a nest. But, Vexathor stammered, his magnificent victory speech forgotten. "The cats? They just sleep and play with string." Maria's grin widened as she pulled up another video on her tablet. "About that, here's what happened when your advance team tried to set up a base in Egypt last week." The footage showed a group of Zaxthari engineers attempting to install equipment in what they thought was an abandoned temple. A group of cats, led by a particularly smug-looking Siamese, had systematically pushed every single piece of technology off the highest available surfaces, maintaining direct eye contact with the increasingly distressed aliens the entire time. "That's Bastet," Maria explained, pointing to the Siamese. "She's the head of the Egyptian Cat Coalition. She'd like to inform you that all your landing sites are now designated as cat napping spots, and your ship's shadows are perfect for afternoon siestas. She's claiming them under Article 47 of the Galactic Code. First come, first served, especially if you're comfy." A junior officer burst onto the bridge, their scales a pale shade of panic. "Supreme Commander, the gorillas at the San Diego Wildlife Preserve have submitted a formal complaint to the Galactic Council. They're demanding compensation for defamation after we called them primitive primates in our victory broadcast. They've retained legal counsel," Maria added helpfully. "Turns out they've been studying Earth's legal systems for years. They're particularly fond of class action lawsuits." Vexathor collapsed into his command chair, his grand conquest crumbling around him. This is impossible. We are the Zaxthari Collective. We have protocols. We have procedures." Speaking of procedures, Maria pulled up another document on her tablet. "I have here the official response from Earth's Cetacean Senate. The Dolphins would like to remind you that unauthorized oceanic mining operations constitute a violation of their territorial waters. They're willing to negotiate, but their first demand is that you attend their underwater poetry slam. All 17 hours of it." The bridge crew watched in horror as more reports flooded in. Crows in Tokyo had organized a protest by arranging shiny pieces of Zaxthari equipment into what was unmistakably a rude gesture, visible from orbit. A group of bonobos had submitted a 400-page critique of Zaxathari social structures to the Galactic Anthropological Society. And most disturbingly, the cats had somehow figured out how to access the fleet's internal communication system and were now randomly interrupting important transmissions with loud purring sounds. "Oh," Maria added, checking her messages, "and the octopuses would like to schedule a demonstration of their problem-solving abilities. They've already solved all the puzzle locks on your cargo holds, by the way. They say the designs were cute, but suggest you might want to try something more challenging next time." Vexathor's scales had settled into a mottled pattern that suggested severe emotional distress. How, how did we miss all this? Well, Maria said, standing up and straightening her jacket. Maybe next time you'll pay more attention during the briefing instead of playing Space Tetris. Now, shall we discuss the terms of your withdrawal? The cats have already claimed your command chair as a scratching post, and I don't think they're taking no for an answer. As if to emphasize her point, a ginger cat materialized on the bridge through what appeared to be the ship's supposedly secure transport system. It made direct eye contact with Vexathor, slowly raised a paw, and deliberately knocked his ceremonial staff off its display stand. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had to be delayed by 17 minutes because nobody could stop laughing. The footage from Earth was being projected on the main chamber screens, and even the normally stoic silicon-based representatives had developed concerning cracks in their crystalline structures from shaking with mirth. The Zaxthari's attempts at diplomatic recovery had gone about as well as trying to herd cats, which coincidentally was exactly what one particularly ambitious diplomat had attempted. The resulting video had already gone viral across 17 star systems. Let us review the diplomatic missions, the council administrator announced, their luminescent form flickering with barely contained amusement. First attempt, the cetacean delegation. The screen showed a Zaxthari diplomat in an underwater meeting room, wearing what appeared to be a hastily modified atmospheric suit. A pod of dolphins circled him, clicking among themselves. Your Aquatic Excellencies, the diplomat began formally, we wish to open negotiations for... The dolphins responded with a synchronized series of backflips, splashing the diplomat with enough force to spin his suit around. When he finally reoriented himself, they had arranged themselves in a formation that unmistakably spelled out LOL when viewed from above. The dolphins would like to note, Maria Chen translated from her seat in the gallery, that they've been practicing that formation for 3 weeks, ever since they intercepted your invasion plans. They felt the wait was worth it. Next, the administrator continued, the Great Ape Embassy. The footage shifted to an elegant conference room in the newly established Primate Diplomatic Center. A different Zaxathari representative sat across from a group of gorillas in tailored suits. The gorillas were pointedly ignoring the alien, instead engaging in an animated discussion about quantum mechanics using sign language. Honored representatives of the great apes, the diplomat tried again, perhaps we could discuss. One of the gorillas held up a hand in the universal just a moment gesture, then continued their conversation about string theory for another 45 minutes. When the diplomat finally got up to leave in frustration, another gorilla simply handed him a banana and went back to their physics discussion. Dr. Ook would like to clarify, Maria interjected, that the banana was not meant as an insult. They just thought the diplomat looked like he needed a healthy snack after all that waiting. The quantum physics discussion, however, was absolutely meant to make a point about primitive primates. And finally, the administrator's glow brightened noticeably, the feline diplomatic response. The chamber erupted in anticipation. This footage had become so popular that some systems had declared it a holiday video. The scene showed the Zaxthari's most experienced negotiator in what had once been an immaculate diplomatic suite. She stood before an assembly of cats of all sizes and breeds who sat in various poses of elegant disinterest. Most esteemed feline council, the negotiator began, we bring offerings of peace and, without breaking eye contact, a massive Maine Coon methodically pushed a priceless Zaxathari cultural artifact off its pedestal. The crash was followed by absolute silence. As I was saying, the negotiator tried again, we hope to establish a Siamese and a Persian coordinated a perfectly timed double-paw swipe that sent another artifact to its doom. Behind them, a tiny kitten was teaching itself how to operate the ship's gravity controls by repeatedly turning them on and off. Please, the negotiator was practically begging now, we can be reasonable. The entire feline assembly turned their backs simultaneously and began grooming themselves. The Maine Coon paused just long enough to knock over one final artifact before joining the collective dismissal. The felines have issued their official response, Maria announced, consulting her tablet. And I quote, no. She paused. That's it, just no. Though they did add a footnote claiming ownership of all Zaxathari ships under the ancient law of I sits where I fits. The council chamber was in chaos. The methane-breathing Jovian representative had laughed so hard they'd accidentally set fire to their ceremonial robes. The silicon-based beings had developed permanent laugh lines in their crystal structures. Additionally, the administrator managed through their own amusement, we've received the following demands. The dolphins require all future communications to be in the form of interpretive water ballet. The great apes have submitted a 1000-page philosophical treatise on the nature of intelligence and suggest the Zaxathari take their time reading it. All of it. And the cats. The cats don't make demands, Maria interrupted with a grin. They've simply decided that the entire Zaxathari fleet now belongs to them. They've already begun redecorating. Apparently, those crystal ships make excellent sunbathing spots. In their designated section, the Zaxathari delegation had turned an impressive shade of mortified. Their scales had settled into what xenobiologists would later term the universal pattern of complete embarrassment. Oh, Maria added, checking her messages. And the Ravens would like to mention they've figured out how to operate your ship's entertainment systems. They're currently broadcasting cat videos across all frequencies. They say it's their contribution to interspecies cultural exchange. The withdrawal of the Zaxathari fleet from Earth's orbit was not quite the majestic departure they had originally envisioned. For one thing, most of their ships now sported elaborate claw marks on their crystalline surfaces. For another, the cats had absolutely refused to vacate their newly claimed sunbathing spots, forcing several ships to maintain specific angles relative to the sun at all times. Supreme Commander Vexathor, now just Commander Vexathor, following a rather tense performance review, had submitted what his superiors were calling the most embarrassing surrender document in galactic history. The fact that it had paw prints and dolphin signatures all over it hadn't helped. Maria Chen stood at the podium in the Galactic Council chamber, delivering what would become known as the perhaps next time speech. The chamber was packed. Apparently nothing drew a crowd quite like watching someone diplomatically say, "I told you so," to an entire civilization. Distinguished members of the council, Maria began, her expression one of perfect professional courtesy that did absolutely nothing to hide her enjoyment of the moment. I stand before you today to discuss the importance of thorough research in interplanetary relations. In their section, the remaining Zaxathari delegation tried to make themselves as small as possible, their scales having settled into what xenobiologists were now calling the universal pattern of "please let this be over." Earth, Maria continued, has always been more than just humanity. We've evolved alongside our fellow sentient species, learning from each other, growing together. The dolphins taught us about the mathematics of wave propagation. The great apes showed us new perspectives on social structures. And the cats, she paused for effect. Well, the cats mostly taught us about the futility of claiming ownership of anything they wanted for themselves. A ripple of laughter went through the chamber. Several council members were already sharing their favorite cat videos from the invasion. The one of Mr. Whiskers reprogramming a Zaxathari defense system to dispense treats had become particularly popular. But perhaps the most valuable lesson here is about assumptions. Maria's tablet pinged, and she checked it with a growing smile. For instance, one might assume that after this experience, the Zaxathari would have learned to be more thorough in their paperwork. The Zaxathari representative, who had just started to relax slightly, suddenly developed a worried expression, which makes it particularly interesting that in their hasty withdrawal agreement, they once again forgot to account for all of Earth's sentient species. Maria's grin had reached levels that would make the Cheshire Cat file a copyright claim. You see, we've just received confirmation from the Cephalopod Science Institute. The results of their intelligence tests have been quite enlightening. The color drained from every Zaxathari scale in the chamber. Oh yes, Maria continued cheerfully, pulling up a holographic display. It turns out octopuses don't just pass the sentience tests. They've actually been running their own experiments on problem-solving capabilities. They found our tests quite amusing, by the way. Almost as amusing as they found your ship's secure locking mechanisms. The hologram showed an octopus casually solving a Zaxathari security puzzle with 3 tentacles while using its other 5 to solve a Rubik's Cube, play chess, and make a sandwich. So, Maria concluded, I'm afraid you'll need to revise all your withdrawal paperwork to include cephalopod rights and territories. The octopuses have already submitted their territorial claims, all 8 tentacles worth of them. They're particularly interested in those lovely crystal ships of yours. Something about optimal tentacle-to-surface ratio for problem-solving scenarios. The Zaxthari representatives swayed slightly in their seat. Oh, and one more thing, Maria added, checking her tablet one final time. The Ravens have been watching all this with great interest. They've submitted a preliminary application for sentience recognition, along with a 1,000-page thesis on tool use and problem solving. They've also included several hundred video examples of their intelligence, which they've helpfully set to autoplay on all your ship's communication screens. The Zaxthari representative finally lost their battle with consciousness, fainting dead away in their seat. Their scales had frozen in a pattern that would later be added to xenobiology textbooks under terminal embarrassment. As the council chamber erupted in laughter, Maria gathered her materials and headed for the exit. She paused at the door, turning back to deliver one final piece of information. By the way, she called out to the stunned assembly, the elephants would like to schedule a meeting about their own sentience application. They've been quite patient about the whole thing, but they never forget, and they have some particularly interesting opinions about your invasion tactics. The sound of the Zaxthari delegation's collective groan was almost drowned out by the council's renewed laughter. As Maria left the chamber, she could have sworn she heard a faint meow from somewhere in the ventilation system. Apparently, Earth's feline ambassadors had already started scouting their next conquest. After all, if there's one thing the galaxy was learning, it's that you should always read the fine print, especially when it's been batted off the table by a cat.